Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. FPL Consult here. It is the international break. We have a bit of downtime now, and I thought it's the perfect opportunity for us to talk about the African Cup of Nations. Now, it will be starting from Game Week 17 onwards. We're now in Game Week 12, so we have a bit of time still, but we're breaching that point in time where the African Cup of Nations starts to come into our thinking and also affects some of our transfers. Say, for example, you don't have Brian Mbeumo. Do you transfer him in? How long will you have with Brian Mbeumo before he leaves for the African Cup of Nations? These are questions that would surround all the players involved in this tournament. So I did a bit of research into the timeline of the competition, also how long players will be gone for depending on how far their country progresses into the competition, who are these players from the different teams, and also a bit of transfer tips and strategy to deal with this period of time in FPL. So if you guys enjoyed today's video, please do drop a like, please do subscribe as well, and let's start off with the timeline of the African Cup of Nations. Now, in terms of actual scheduled games, it will run from Game Week 17 all the way until Game Week 22. Now, the group stage games will begin in between Game Week 17 and Game Week 18, and it will run all the way through from Game Week 18 to 19, and just before Game Week 20 is when the group stage games will end. And on Game Week 20 deadline will be the round of 16 games. That's when the round of 16 will start, and then it will run all the way through Game Week 21. And then there will be the quarterfinals as well as the semi-finals. It will be around that period of time. And come to Game Week 22, the Game Week 22 deadline that is, that weekend will be the finals as well as the third and fourth placing. So this is kind of big picture view as to when each of these stages would be played. But the main question would be, then how long will our players be gone for depending on how far they progress into the tournament? And I start with Game Week 16, even though the previous graphic started from Game Week 17. And that's because most of the time before these kind of big competitions, the countries like to call their players in slightly earlier. They have a bit of training sessions, a couple of friendly games, get some chemistry going before they actually start the tournament. So we have to be prepared that players who are involved in the African Cup of Nations will be away from their Premier League teams from Game Week 16 onwards already. So that's why I've started all these different bars with Game Week 16. And thereafter, for the group of players who are out in the group stage, they should come back in time for Game Week 20. Now, this is not guaranteed, and that's why out in the group stage, that bar is kind of in between Game Week 19 and Game Week 20. The last day of the group stage games is 2 days before Game Week 20. So it is quite tight for players who are playing in those last few days, even though they're out in the group stage and they're out of the tournament already. It's pretty hard for them to fly back to the UK in just a few days and be ready to start in Game Week 20. So I'd say for those players, they will miss out in Game Week 20 as well. But for those players who are eliminated much earlier and don't play in the last few days of the group stage games, they would obviously then make it back in time for Game Week 20. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of players who are eliminated in the group stage. As for those players who progress to the next round of the competition, it does not matter whether they are eliminated in the round of 16 or the quarterfinals. They will most definitely miss Game Week 21. And I say this because the difference in terms of the Game Week 20 deadline and the Game Week 21 deadline is only 3 days apart. So it's a very tight turnaround between those two deadlines. It's the festive period where there's lots of games going on. So that's why, say for example, those teams, they get into the round of 16 and they get eliminated, they still won't make it back in time for Game Week 21. If they qualify for the quarterfinals, then they will most definitely miss Game Week 21 because the quarterfinals only happens after Game Week 21. Right, and then for those players who are from teams who progress to the semi-finals, then for sure they would have to stay on even longer and they will miss Game Week 22 because the semi-finals happens just a few days before Game Week 22. And you'll remember in the previous graphic as well, the Game Week 22 deadline is when the finals as well as the third and fourth placing happens. The winner of the finals and essentially the winner of the competition, it's very likely that they would have some celebrations and some ceremonies as well. And you would expect that, those players would continue to stay with their country all the way past Game Week 23. So it's likely they will miss Game Week 23 as well, and you will only see them back in the Premier League ready for Game Week 24. So this is a rough kind of estimation. Obviously, exactly how it turns out would then have to depend on the different schedules for the countries, when exactly they're eliminated, and obviously whether the players can make it back in time for the different deadlines as well. So this is just a rough idea to give you guys an estimation of how long the players will be away at the African Cup of Nations. So having a closer look now at exactly who are the players involved from the different teams, I won't go through every single one of them, but I wanted to highlight firstly, there are actually Premier League teams who have 0 players going to the African Cup of Nations, and they are Arsenal, Chelsea, and Leeds. These are teams that will not be affected by the African Cup of Nations at all, right? So that's great in terms of Arsenal assets. Firstly, you won't be, missing key players, etc. Same for Chelsea and Leeds as well. Now, going on to a couple of key players that I want to highlight. I mean, obviously you can screenshot this part of the video and come back to refer to it as and when you require. But I wanted to highlight a few key players from the different teams and how them leaving for the African Cup of Nations may impact overall the team performance, the Premier League team performance. So the first one I want to point out is actually Dango Ouattara from Brentford. Now, Dango Ouattara has started the season really, really well, and he's already scored a couple of goals. Very key to kind of creating chances for Thiago, who has done splendid for the first few game weeks already. And yeah, Ouattara is just a very key part of the Brentford attack. He will be missing from game week, I would say 16 onwards, and that could have an impact on Thiago and maybe something to think about for those of you who are sitting on whether to bring Thiago in to your FPL teams. Now, beside him is Onyeka. I think probably less of an impact there. Brighton Baliba, who's obviously a key player for them in the midfield, will be gone for the African Cup of Nations as well. In terms of Crystal Palace, the big one here is obviously Ismail Assar. He will be missing. People who are looking to bring Ismail Assar in, for example, I don't think that will put you off right now, because as I'll elaborate later on, you will have a few game weeks with the player before he leaves. So not too bad at all, especially given that Sarr is playing Wolves. It's just something at the back of your mind that he will be leaving for the African Cup of Nations. That could obviously impact Crystal Palace's performance overall once he leaves for that period of time. Next up, it's Everton, 2 key players, Iliman Ndiaye and Idrissa Gana Gueye. And Idrissa Gana Gueye has been a really key part of that midfield as well. So you would expect that maybe the Everton performances come off a little bit. As for Fulham, it's also 2 rather key players there in Iwobi and Calvin Bassey. Maybe Chukwueze is not as much, but yeah, Iwobi and Bassey are the ones to highlight. Liverpool, Mo Salah for sure, going away with Egypt. And for Manchester United, this is where Brian Mbeumo and also Amad Diallo, the entire right side of the Manchester midfield, will be gone. So I think that's a period I expect Manchester United to struggle quite a bit, because these are 2 key players. But also maybe it comes into your thinking as to whether you want to bring Mbeumo in if you're only going to get him for a few weeks. I still think it's worth it if you do it now, but the longer you delay it, as I'll explain later, it will be less worth it. Right, and then Manchester City will be Aït-Nouri and Marmoush. Wissa from Newcastle, but he's obviously not even available now. And then as you go along, you'll see that Sunderland, who is the last team I want to highlight, they have 9 players who are leaving for the African Cup of Nations. Maybe not really, really key players who are, part of their starting 11, but players like Adingra form quite an integral part of the bench in terms of rotations for Sunderland as well. In essence, I think Sunderland will be stretched quite thin during the period of the African Cup of Nations. So also something to think about. But at least what's good is that none of their really key players, such as, Ballard or up front Isidore, Mukele, for example, none of these players are going away for the African Cup of Nations. But yeah, I think they will be stretched quite thin. Right, so overall, big picture, again, this is the group of players who will be going for the African Cup of Nations. You can screenshot this if you feel like you want to come back to it. If not, let's have a look at my general tips to navigate this period. So one of the big announcements that we had in preseason in relation to the African Cup of Nations was that FPL will be topping up our transfers to 5 free transfers in Game Week 16, and this is regardless of how many free transfers we had in Game Week 15. So if you are to take full advantage of this situation and you want to gain 5 free transfers, what you should aim to do is expend all your free transfers by the Game Week 15 deadline, so that when you're topped up to 5 free transfers in Game Week 16, those are full 5 free transfers that you've gained. If I juxtapose this to another situation where you carry 2 transfers in Game Week 15 and you didn't use any, naturally, come Game Week 16, assuming there was no topping up, you would get 1 additional one in Game Week 16. And then, given this African Cup of Nations is allowing us to be topped up to 5, then you have, in essence, only gained 2 additional transfers. You're not actually taking full advantage of this situation. So in short, aim to use all your free transfers by Game Week 15, and then come Game Week 16, you would have gained 5 transfers from FPL. Now, the next few pointers that I want to speak about are in relation to some highly owned FPL assets. So popular players like Semenyo or Kudus, they will not be going to the African Cup of Nations because Ghana did not qualify. It was a bit of a shock at that point in time that Ghana did not make it to the African Cup of Nations. But with that said, players like Semenyo, who a lot of us have in our FPL teams, he will not be going to the African Cup of Nations, and so will Kudus as well. Now, next up, if you are thinking of buying players who are going to the African Cup of Nations, you should do it now in Game Week 12, as you will have at least 5 game weeks with the player before he leaves. And obviously, I'm looking at Brian Mbumo here, who a lot of people, including myself, are looking to bring him in because he's been playing really well for Manchester United. 5 attacking returns in the last 5 game weeks speaks for itself in terms of the FPL returns. But really, the longer you delay bringing someone like Brian Mbumo in, the less sense it would make to go for him, because in Game Week 12, you buy him, you have 5 game weeks left with him. You delay to Game Week 13, you'll only have 4 game weeks left, and so on and so forth. So the longer you delay, the less worth it becomes. I'm not saying that just because he's going to the African Cup of Nations that you must buy him now. I'm just saying that it's just something you should consider, that if you don't buy him now, I genuinely don't think you would move for him in the next few game weeks because it just becomes too late already. So these are my general tips for the African Cup of Nations, how to navigate it, the players involved, the timeline, etc. And before we end today's video, I want to speak very briefly about our FPL group chat. Now, I know it's international break, there's not a lot going on in FPL right now, but that is not the case in our FPL Consult Telegram group chat. There's actually more than 1,500 FPL managers in the group right now, and every other day, there's lots of FPL activity going on in there. People are sending wildcard drafts, free hit drafts, strategy discussions, transfer advice, etc. It's basically a whole community of FPL managers helping each other and enjoying the game together as well. And that was the purpose of why I set up the Telegram group chat. So it's completely free to join. If over the international break you want to bounce some ideas with those in the community, feel free to just scan the QR code or use the first link in the description to join our community and be part of this incredible group of FPL managers that we have in there. If not, I hope you enjoyed today's video and found some use in it. If you did, please do drop a like. Please do subscribe as well. If you join the group chat, I'll see you in there. If not, I'll catch you in the next video very, very soon. Bye-bye.